to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth.
Well, hello, you wonderful people. Oh, wait. Equal to Reality is in the chat and stole my line. Super cool to see that. In fact, if you're listening live, I know a lot of people do the podcast. I do too. A lot of people listen after the fact. But if you are live, I want to see you in the chat because I want to talk to you about context. What do you mean context? Context keeping. Well, this is actually going to be pretty cool. I gave a talk a few years back, Great Lakes Objectivists, GlowCon, our annual conference. We got to start that back up again. Got knocked sideways by COVID. Unacceptable. And I gave a talk on context. And I asked the question, well, why? Why clarify your understanding and increase your appreciation of context? Why spend time on this? Well, because it's rational. Because it's valuable, because it will make you invincible. All men will admire you and all women will want to be with you. Or change the genders, or not these days. Who knows what you have to do with genders? Yes, we are going to talk about trans today. But let me start with an exercise. Do this. You are a certain height. A is A. You are however tall you are. So test this out. If you are sitting down, well, at home, stand up. If you're in your car, you'll have to do this as a thought experiment. Trust me, it works. Stand up, go to the nearest wall, and reach up. And reach up good. Reach up as high as you can reach up. Put your fingertip on the wall, like a measure of how tall and how far you can reach your finger up. And feel it, feel your height. It's funny because if you saw the Thursday Collective today, if you didn't, you got to go back and watch it after this. On the Daily Objective, the Thursday Collective edition, one of the questions that came up is, well, what is a manly height? What's a proper height for a person to be? They had great fun with that. But whatever your height is, reach it up, put your finger on the wall, and there's your height. Hold that position. And for our purposes, consider it like similar to your conceptual reach, your intellectual power. Leonard Peikoff was asked what Ayn Rand thought about the idea of IQ, and he responded, Ayn Rand regarded it as the ability to hold broad abstractions, and that, as a measure, it was relatively unimportant, since you've got whatever intelligence you've got. That was Ayn Rand's perspective. Whatever you've got, you've got. Now, focus again on where your fingertip is on the wall. Now do this. Raise your fingertip half an inch. I'll wait. Surprise, surprise, if you're like me or like anybody else on planet Earth, you probably got another half inch or at least a quarter inch. You got a little more out of you. You've got that bit of room to stretch, a bit of room to grow. I know in any given context, I could probably be doing better, but it's not even that hard. Why make the effort? By the time we're done, you'll know clarity, confidence, conviction, persuasiveness, impact, benevolence, and truth. See, on today's TDO, the Daily Objective, this was great, Thursday Collective, the topic of pride was brought up. And by pride, we mean moral ambitiousness. We're going to be using Rand's definitions throughout this. Context is everything, literally everything. So let me go to the Oxford Dictionary for the definition of context. The circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. So how fully? How fully is depends on your context of knowledge and your purpose. What are you thinking, doing, contemplating, planning? What are you arguing? For example, in Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, Ayn Rand says, concepts are not and cannot be formed in a vacuum. They are formed in a context. The process of conceptualization consists of observing the differences and similarities of the existence within the field of one's awareness and organizing them into concepts accordingly. From a child's grasp of the simplest concept, integrating a group of perceptually given concretes, to a scientist's grasp of the most complex abstractions, integrating long conceptual chains, all conceptualization is a contextual process. The context is the entire field of a mind's awareness or knowledge at any level of cognitive development. Unquote. If the objectivist perspective on knowledge is correct, and it is, and all knowledge is contextual, then keeping context is essential. And dropping context leads to error and uncertainty and failure. There are many values, cognitive values, practical values, which a proper appreciation of context provides. Some of these values are clear. For example, context keeping strengthens one's understanding and, in discussion, your arguments. Other values may become obvious by spending a few minutes considering this concept. I'm going to keep this short and limit today's discussion to 3 central, invaluable ideas. Number 1, define your terms. Quoting Ayn Rand from Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, Chapter 5, Definitions. If definitions are contextual, how does one determine an objective definition valid for all men? It is determined according to the widest context of knowledge available to man on the subjects relevant to the units of a given concept. And then you'll recognize this quote: the truth or falsehood of all of man's conclusions, inferences, thought, and knowledge rests on the truth or falsehood of his definitions. Okay, so here's a provocative thought. See if you agree on this. If you agree, this is powerful stuff. Words, language is not, first of all, a tool of communication. First and foremost, language is the stuff of thought. I don't know, the objectivists might not find that controversial. When I talk to other people, when I talk philosophy with non-objectivists, and with some objectivists, and I say, language is a tool of communication. They say, yeah, that's what it's for. I said, no, first and foremost, it's the tool of thought. If your concepts, your words are undefined or wrongly defined or are out of context, unrelated to the facts that you're considering or the decision that you're making, your thoughts will have a similar character. So, critical step in keeping context, define your terms. Should you be tough on your kids? That depends on your context. Are you deciding to be matter of fact and strict, or substitute your judgment for theirs? A conversation came up about an article in which it was discussed. Here's one. The headline: straight men sometimes have sex with other men. Straight men have sex with other. I did a post, which has gotten me in all sorts of trouble, one of my favorites. 10 beliefs, non-political, unpopular. It went around as a meme. What are 10 things you believe, not political, that are unpopular? And one of them, my number 3 item is, all of your opinions regarding sex are wrong. And I explained, because you don't know what sex is. If that sounds wrong, try defining your terms. What do you mean by sex? Oh, well, No. So that's why when I see straight men who sometimes have sex with other men, define your terms, and the headline either is not really saying much or it's nonsense. And then you can point it out. It's a hilarious conversation that flowed out of that. And there's just the discussion. Here's one for you, and this is recent. In fact, this is kind of a current event. There's the discussion regarding Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism and whether it's open or closed. Is it an open philosophy or a closed philosophy? Now, define your terms, and the issue virtually dissolves. Is objectivism open to other philosophers adding or even changing ideas within the totality of Ayn Rand's philosophic framework? Or is objectivism, to steal a phrase, the philosophy of Ayn Rand? Define what you mean by open or closed in this context, and the argument's over. I know there's a debate coming up on that. I don't think there's going to be much debate. Define your terms. If you're unfortunate enough to find yourself having this discussion, open or closed, usually online, the easiest way to end it is to get the folks who are disagreeing to define their terms. The issue practically goes away. It just dissolves into nothing. Define your terms. That's number one. Number two, well, I'm not going to give number two. Not yet, because first I've got to give a huge shout out to Jonathan Honig, who is with the super chat. We are on the Ayn Rand Center UK. You know what that means. If you don't, I'll tell you. The Ayn Rand Center UK, second only to the Ayn Rand Institute, is the preeminent organization talking Ayn Rand, talking objectivism, sharing these ideas, providing both information and entertainment. I know infotainment is a word. It gets stuck on my tongue. I don't say it. Information and entertainment and inspiration to folks out there. I'll leave myself out and just say every other show on the Ayn Rand Center UK, on our YouTube channel, but also our study groups and sessions, the Fiction Club. Every other program associated with the Ayn Rand Center UK is outstanding. And Jonathan Honig, thank you for that super chat. Any super chats that come in, support the ARC UK. Further, if you're not already a member, there's a membership link right at the top of the chat. And finally, you can become a YouTube member and get access to some YouTube feeds that are just for people supporting the organization in that way. And now I am ready to go to item number two. After define your terms, number two, check your premises. In the conflicts of men's interests, in that essay, The Conflict of Men's Interests, Ayn Rand names context as one of, quote, the four interrelated considerations which are involved in a rational man's view of his interests. We're talking about the conflicts of men's interests. And she names them: A, reality; B, context; C, responsibility; and D, effort. And she goes on to write, B, context. Just as a rational man does not hold any convictions out of context, that is, without relating it to the rest of his knowledge and resolving any possible contradictions, so he does not hold or pursue any desire out of context. And he does not judge what is or is not to his interest out of context on the range of any given moment. So again, going back to the Oxford dictionaries, context, the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. So how broad is this setting? Am I saying everything is subject to the butterfly effect? In a word, yes. I used to think some things are irrelevant to a given context. And this is true metaphysically, but Andrew Bernstein reminded me that, in life, your time and your focus, your attention, are finite. So in this sense, if it ain't for me, it's against me. If it's not for you, it's against you. So you want to know, when addressing any given issue or fact or making a decision, what's the context? What does it have to do with everything else that matters? So one example. Which one of these is bad? Antifa or the neo-Nazis? So a spoiler alert, Antifa and neo-Nazis, they're both bad. Well, that's part of the answer. What's the rest of the answer? And that depends on what the question means. This question is short. It's vague. It's lacking context. And if you answer it, your answer is as useless as the question. Hell, it's not even really a question. It's just an invitation to rant. Now, if I asked you which one is worse, Antifa or the neo-Nazis, I hope you would say, well, worse in what way? Now, if I asked you, well, which is a more ominous sign for the immediate future, a small group of ahistorical reactionary skinheads with an evil nihilistic embrace of nationalism and race and identity, or a large and growing group of leftists whose anger about racism and sexism and desire for egalitarianism has turned a substantial number of them increasingly violent, while the larger, more moderate membership ignores or excuses the violence. Okay, that's an actual question. And unsurprisingly, it's a question for which there's an answer. So, quoting Ayn Rand, one must never make any decisions, form any convictions, or seek any values out of context, i.e., apart from or against the total integrated sum of one's knowledge. From The Virtue of Selfishness, the Objectivist Ethics. So that's number 2. Number 3, understand the contraries, the alternatives, the opposition. Know your enemy, not who they are, but what they actually think. One goal is to take seriously your alternatives, or in the case of disagreement, steelman the enemy. It's the opposite of straw manning him. Understand your opposition. You know, most of what we're offered are false alternatives, false dichotomies, which can manifest in many ways. As objectivists, we should be used to this. And we should be able to explain complex answers to complex issues concisely. It's not that things aren't either or, but many matters are complex enough that all the elements which determine the answer, they've got to be considered and addressed. So should Confederate flags be flown on government buildings? Or how about the monuments of Confederate soldiers, the statues of generals? What about memorials to founding fathers who were also slave owners? You want to try to offer a yes or no answer to that? The goal is not pragmatic compromise between facts or aspects of a situation, but integration of all the relevant information to achieve clear, correct, contextually valid answers. Not complexity for complexity's sake, but all of the relevant knowledge integrated by broad abstractions. I used to say, for example, I still say, it's when things are at their worst that you need to be at your best. This is a true and valuable reminder, so far as it goes. Now, since then, I've learned, well, but there's more than one. And more importantly, there's more than 2 possible approaches to managing adversity. And your own reaction, your own state in the face of challenges. There's perhaps 5 ways you could look at this. And I do, in fact, find it more rational, more true, and therefore more useful, more inspiring to say, it's very often the case that yes, when things are at their worst, being at your best is important. And yes, I still say that shorthand. It's when things are at their worst that you need to be at your best. But sometimes, no, sometimes it's appropriate to punt. And further, to go one level deeper, to broaden the context. If it's appropriate to punt, then in a very real sense, that is you at your best. Now, if the habit of considering the broader context seems like a bother, unnatural, beyond your skills, or beyond having any reason to care about it, if you can't do it, well, if you can't do it, I say do it anyway. Another one of those shorthands for something much bigger. But yes, if you can't do it anyway. Now, if that sounds like a contradiction, it is, if you limit the context. But then most of you were able to raise your finger half an inch higher too. TV host and all-around good guy Mike Rowe replied to a Facebook commenter who asked, "How do you craft such clever responses?" And here's Mike Rowe's answer. He says, "I use this technique regularly. I try to imagine that I'm smarter than I am." I love that. I am a big advocate of this technique across a broad range of contexts. I mean, sure, you say you don't know what to do, but what would you do if you knew what to do? That doesn't always give you an answer, but it often does. Sure, you're scared right now, but what would you be doing if you weren't scared? Just asking that question opens doorways. Sure, it's Monday and you don't want to go to work, but what would you be thinking if you were actually happy it's Monday and you were eager to get to work? Or, in this particular case, you don't know what the other side of your argument is. You don't know any good reasons why your opponent would be opposing your stance, nor what the answer is. But if you were that guy, what would you be thinking? What would you imagine if you asked him what he was thinking, his answer would be? The point is not to approach matters simplistically, nor to consider every relevant and non-relevant aspect until one suffers analysis paralysis and is unable to judge properly. That too is a false alternative. There is an appropriate, reasonable amount of time and effort to put in any given thought process. There's a degree of understanding that yields truth, even in complex issues. I'll give an Ayn Rand quote, but first I've got to say thank you to Catherine, who is in with another super chat. Thank you for that and for supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK. You rock. Thank you. Ayn Rand writes this in The Cult of Moral Grayness. There are, of course, complex issues in which both sides are right in some respects and wrong in others. And it is here that the package deal of pronouncing both sides gray is least permissible. It is in such issues that the most rigorous precision of moral judgment is required to identify and evaluate the various aspects involved, which can be done only by unscrambling the mixed elements of black and white. Unquote. The point of understanding the full context of issues and ideas, the point is to get it right, to see beyond the range of the moment and judge the full context, everything that matters about a given idea or issue. As with reaching your physical height, you can often do a bit better just by choice. And now we're ready to talk trans. Transsexuality is complicated. It's complicated. Now, the left wants to pretend that it's not. And the right wants to pretend that it's not. The left wants to pretend it's not complicated because trans men are men, trans women are women. And they want to stop the discussion right there. It's no more complicated than that. And the right wants to pretend it's not complicated. Trans simply doesn't exist at all. Gender dysphoria is nothing more than subjectivism and whim worship. In the recent podcast series, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, if you haven't heard that yet, very good listen. In the final episode, Ms. Rowling was asked, well, what if you're wrong? And Jo gets it. She knows it's complicated. She is in trouble because she knows it's complicated. She's in trouble for not treating it simplistically, for not, for example, just signing on with the chant, trans men are men, trans women are women. If you're a trans activist, only the simple answers are acceptable. Trans women are women. If you're a reactionary on the other side, only the simple answers are acceptable there too. The whole trans issue, it was never an issue before, so it's all made up. It's all about power and nihilism. It's a great question, though. What if I'm wrong? What would I have to believe what the opposition believes? It's a great question to ask yourself, not to make yourself unsure, to second guess yourself, but to steel man the opposition, to know that you're right in terms that make sense or should make sense to any reasonable person coming from any reasonable position. Transsexualism. This is an issue we should own. You don't think so? Think back to the question of gay marriage. Another issue which I asserted at the time, we should own this. Prior to 2015, when it was still an issue, it was still contentious. To some people, it still is. The answers back then, they seemed complicated. And in substantial ways, they were. In some ways, they still are. But we're objectivists. We've got the owner's manual for human beings, for life on Earth. We have the answers to complex issues. Or should. When gay marriage was the story, we had the right answers. And now with transsexuals, we have the answers. The gays, they were our people. In just the same way. The easy answers aren't the right answers. If gender dysphoria is a real phenomenon, then we should be the ones who can say, well, here's what's rational in this context. We should be able to say, well, this aspect is real, and these others aren't. Yes, it is complicated, and here's what the rational answers are, the moral answers, the legal answers. Here's how this will work in regard to property rights. Here's how it will work in regard to parental rights and sports competitions and trans women, AKA biological men, in women's prisons. We can be simultaneously passionate and dispassionate. We can make that stretch, just like with gay marriage. Do not let the narrative on either side put a hook in your nose and lead you around by a string. You are not and should not be a marionette on those strings. The last thing I'll say for now on the issue of transsexuality. If you assume that for trans people, identity is all about emotions, that there's nothing more to it than that they feel like a different gender, you are the one being an emotionalist. No easy answers. But easier than most, since we are driven by rational, reality-based principles. If you want somebody who can get complexity right, who can get context right, consider climate change. What are the options you're given in regard to climate change? You're given the option of, we're destroying the planet, and we need to change everything about what we do and make enormous sacrifices in order to save the planet, versus what? Versus mankind is far too weak and helpless to do that to something as magnificent as God's creation. How could we possibly be destroying the planet? And besides, the left are all nihilists. They want you to believe we're destroying it, and that's enough of a reason to believe we're not destroying it. What would a context-respecting approach be? A context-respecting approach would look at the evidence, but also what the evidence means. Somebody, say, like Alex Epstein, who's actually capable of saying, anthropogenic, why do I always have trouble with that word? Anthropogenic, man-caused, human-caused global warming. There may actually be some of that. And at the same time, whatever challenges that presents are no reason to abandon fossil fuels. In fact, the embrace of fossil fuels will be part of dealing with, if there is a substantial impact from man's activity, whatever that turns out to be. That is context keeping. And I have books on this issue. What do we have? Dixie Lee Ray's Trashing the Planet, for example. All sorts of good information, all sorts of good stuff, but they can't help thinking it's either or. Either we're right and we're not doing anything at all to hurt the planet, or they're right and we're destroying it. No, keeping context means being able to say whatever impact we are having, we need a man-centered approach to managing it. Love that. Love, love, love that. And that is what we need to be doing. Yesterday on the Daily Objective, number 721, Nikos Sotirakopoulos and Dr. Ben Baer, I should say Dr. Sotirakopoulos, he's got his PhD, right? They had a great discussion about this question: studying humanities at the university, is it worth it? Question mark. Let me talk about that for a bit, but first I've got to give a shout out. We've got a few more super chats here. Very generous and very much appreciated. Jeff Bannister's in for $11. Thank you for that, sir. Emmanuel says, and with another generous $9.99, Robert, you are such an inspiration. Thank you. Absolutely love the insight and voice of reasonness you provide consistently. I appreciate that, especially an episode like this one, because I know it's going to be contentious for a lot of people. And I'm open to that. If you can tell me, well, on this issue, whatever it turns out to be, trans or anything else, you're wrong about, I'm open to that, because context is everything. And Rhett Henderson says, and for a generous $9.99 says, a few weeks ago you said, to the extent success is possible, you deserve to go for it. But you don't know me. If I've done regrettable things appropriate of guilt, how can I still be deserving person? That's a great question. And it's a context-laden question. I'll get to that in just a bit. Thank you for that, Rhett. The short answer is I do tend to read a lot into the fact that you are watching me right now. That tells me something. It tells me something about you. At the end of our Sunday shows, Amy, Nasir, and I will often say, you deserve every bit of success you've so richly deserved, that you've earned. And I will answer the question without even being asked, well, how do I know you deserve it? Because ne'er-do-wells, lousy people, people with nothing going for them, people who have no interest in ever improving, people who don't have any sense of being responsible for their past actions, they don't listen to a show like this. I am not giving those kind of people what they need at all. Or rather, I'm not giving them what they want at all. I guess I would say I'm giving them exactly what they need. Thanks for the question, Rhett. I want to talk about that one some more. But let me jump back, because I wanted to mention TDO, the Daily Objective, 721, Nikos and Ben Baer talking about studying humanities at the university. Is it worth it? It was a compelling discussion. And by my interpretation, Nikos had a lot of evidence to offer from, why the answer to the question is no, it's not worth it. Why would you go to a university and spend, $66,000, depending on the university, $66,000 a year to learn things you could just as well learn on your own without being punished by the woke, without being penalized for your beliefs? All true. And props to Nikos for surviving the university experience, both as a student and as a professor. But in the full context, I've got to give props to Dr. Ben Baer. A couple of points that stood out. Any question of, is it worth it? It's hugely contextual. And Dr. Baer gets this. Is $66,000 a lot of money? For some people, yes. For some people, not as much. It's like the French fry story. I've told the French fry story. I used to work, before I was an IT professional for 25 years, I used to manage fast food restaurants. Back in the fast food restaurants, we would get people who would come through our drive-thru, come into the restaurant and say, give me a cheeseburger and a small fry and a small Coke. And we would tell them, well, you can get a cheeseburger and a medium fry and a medium Coke, and it will actually cost less. We have a combo with that. And several times I would get people saying, no. I don't want a medium fry. I don't want a medium drink. I want what I asked for. And I know so many people, and especially the kids who work there, and maybe even me to some extent, would say, well, sure, but if you're not going to finish the fries or the drink, just throw them out when you're done, when you've had enough. And the point is, they would rather spend the extra 50 cents, whatever it is, to get exactly what they want. Money was not the issue when it was more, this is what I want. I don't care what it costs. Give me what I want. And college degrees are like that, or rather everything with a dollar sign is like that. $66,000 is a lot of money to most people, probably to everybody. $66,000 isn't something that you pass up on a whim, like getting the right size of French fries. But it's also highly context dependent. $66,000 isn't going to be a whimsical amount for anyone, but it's also not a deal breaker for everyone. It's a bigger part of the budget for some of us than others. The value of a dollar is relative, not subjective, but relational. Whether it's a small fry in your cheeseburger or a college education at a university. And what is the value received? Dr. Baer talked about the value of the college life experience. I unfortunately didn't go away to college. I went to U of M Dearborn, we commuted. But I can only imagine what the college, I know people who went away to college. It's a magnificent experience done properly. And there's the credentials that you earn, which are often useful or even required for certain professions, some kinds of positions without that 4-year degree or 6-year degree, graduate degree, whatever it would be. And the actual knowledge learned, and Dr. Baer pointed this out, it's different than what you're going to learn by self-study or distance learning. And of course, you can do all three and get the best of 3 worlds. And there's the question, and this is a hugely contextual question, of whether the university is actually woke, or is it just the university's administration is just woke tolerant? And there's more. It's a broad context. Always be willing to go that level deeper, one level more nuanced, because that's often where the gold, the diamonds, or the money is. The vast majority of our limitations are self-imposed, including the limits of our understanding. The always compelling Louise LaMontagne, Facebook's The John Galt Group. If you're not a member, you should be. If you're not on Facebook, you should be, because I'm there. Good enough reason to be on the platform. But she raised the question of what governments should do legislatively. And a lot of the answers that she got from objectivists were disappointingly simplistic. A laissez-faire government is not going to be a simple government. Sure, I'm compared to what we've got right now. Yeah, vastly so. But the legal precedents set so far, just right now, the rules on what crimes count as what, on how real estate and property rights and egress, rights of access are defined, and how harm is defined, and how that applies in transportation and food and cosmetics and on the ski slopes. Things which some simplistic thinkers regard as regulation are really just definition. We have to be effective by being better than simplistic answers. Be the better man, the better woman, which in this context means context respecting. We can't afford, not just for the larger cause, but just for our own sake, we can't afford simplistic arguments, declarations, which only hurt your own cause, convince you that other people don't think, they don't listen, they're all sheep, and make you more miserable without even the virtue of being right, of being correct, of being the good guy. Context isn't a ball and chain, it's a powerful ally and a tour de force in understanding and advocating for just about anything. Now, I've got to say, some of our adversaries use context, the concept of context in just that way, as a fudge factor, an entree into subjectivism. But the solution isn't to throw out the concept context. The solution is to master it. A Twitter post today asked this conversation prompt, this leading question. What are you grateful for today? And it's out, me? I am grateful for context keeping, for folks who are determined to think about current events and issues and their own beliefs, their goals, their values, their lives in rich, nuanced, wise, considerate ways. And there's so much more of this than we think. Out there, I mean, of reasonable people, of people trying to understand life, the universe, and everything. And far more than news reports would suggest. Dr. Ben Baer pointed this out. The university experience, and I would say life in general, is skewed vastly negative by virtue of news reporting. You don't hear nearly so much about good people in the news. You hear about those woke incidents at the universities. You don't hear about the good people. You don't hear about reasonable people, accomplished people. Real life executives and workers and lecturers and presenters and musicians and conductors and athletes and dancers. You don't hear as much about that as you do about the woke and the reactionaries. Keeping context includes understanding negativity bias. It includes remembering the surgeons and the engineers and the teachers and the managers and the designers and the entrepreneurs and the architects and the guitarists and the homemakers. If you want more on this, listen to my Sunday show with Amy Nasir, 5 Minutes with Robert and Amy Nasir from this past Sunday. I did an episode, Yes fans will recognize that's why I have my Yes coffee mug today. We did an episode called I've Seen All Good People. There's a link at robertnasir.com. Respect for context, context keeping. This is integrity. Out of context pronouncements, declarations, behavior, these are all a failure of integrity, of integrating what you know and what you believe and what your values are and what virtues you practice, of being honest with yourself in thought and in action. Wisdom is the product of practicing epistemological and existential integrity. On Monday, in his ARCUK segment, Dr. Binswanger answered a question on how do we know when we're rationalizing. He described the experience as it has a bad smell to it. And you're thinking, listen to that episode. There's a video short you can watch first. Out of context pronouncements and out of context behavior, these are similarly rationalizations and a failure of integrity, a failure of integrating what I know and what I believe and what my values are and what virtues I practice with the broader context of what I know about real life out there in the world. And one more last minute super chat. Thank you, Walter. I very much appreciate that. Walter Bishak is in for €2, which I'm sure is still worth a lot more than $2. Got to work on that. So I commit to doing better. And if you too have room to grow, if you've got another half inch in you, I encourage you to join me in all of the issues, both common and contentious, that we confront and on which we need to share our opinions, state our positions, and make real decisions in order to live our own best lives. We will keep context as best we can in order that you and I can each live our own best life on earth.